This girl's name is Annie. When she was a young girl of 14, she would spend her afternoons looking through old albums, looking at photos of her mother when she was the same age. But this is not a harmless experience. I saw this interview on a famous program, on an American talk show. It was with the famous talk show host Oprah, and this girl said that since she was very young, she used to look through, I repeat, her mother's albums when she was the same age, but she would do it with a pained expression on her face when she saw her mother at the age she was. And she says that she began to take excessive care of herself, to the point that it prevented her from being happy for much of her childhood and then her adolescence. And Annie begins to tell her story. She says, I wondered if I was ever going to be as pretty as her. And one night, as I was getting ready to go shopping with some friends, I was getting into the car, my mother looked at me and said, "What do you think you're doing?" And I got scared and I said, "Why? I'm going with my friends." Quote, and he said, "Don't you dare go out like that without makeup, because you look horrible. You look horrible." Quote, so at 14 years old, the girl says that now that she's on television she's not 14 anymore, she's about 3 and something. She says, when I was 14, my mother's comments had an unmistakable impact on me, a terrible, terrifying impact. And today I want to take a few minutes to talk about certain things that the Lord put on my heart less than 2 months ago. He tells me that all Hispanics, especially human beings, but especially Hispanics, are idolaters. We all tend to idolize something. The issue is not whether you are an idolater or not, but what you worship, who you worship. Within these idolatries, I have noticed that the Hispanic people, and this is a self-criticism, tend to have a cult, an exaggerated cult of aesthetics, of appearance, of image. When I saw a girl who, because of a simple comment from her mother, said, "Don't go out without makeup, how are you going to go out with your hair disheveled?" Which I think every mother has or should have with her daughter. We don't know how that can impact a fragile mind, the mind of an infant or the mind of someone who is just developing their self-esteem. Sometimes the girl can take it in a positive way and say, "Yes, I'm going to put on makeup, I'm going to get ready. The old lady is right." And sometimes, like in this case, who knows, the change, the hormonal imbalance that she was experiencing, caused an impact that affected her for the rest of her life. Because she ended up confessing on television that before falling into bulimia, into anorexia, before falling into the scourges that almost ended her life, she ended up thinking that she would never be as beautiful or as pretty as her mother. And when self-esteem is destroyed by image, we realize that Annie is not the only one who suffers from this. According to a recent survey, on average, it is not that I am going to talk only about women, let me just move on, but it is to start. On average, women have 13 negative ideas about their body or about their body daily. Not all of them, but a large majority. I am very fat, I am very thin, my breasts are very small, my ears are very big, my butt droops like my father's, my hair is very curly, I am worthless, no man will notice me. And this self-criticism begins early because another very serious study showed that almost half of girls between the ages of 3 and 6 worry about being fat, and about a third of them want to change something about their bodies. We are talking about very young girls, between the ages of 3 and 6. But appearance is not limited to, or this desire to appear and be perfectly fine is not limited to, girls and adult women. Men also deal with it. I still remember how much I suffered for not having brand name sneakers, for inheriting my brother's backpacks, which of course were horrible, but we could not buy new ones. I remember the embarrassment when they cut my hair very short once, because my classmates had weekend houses. Some others would say, "My dad has a company, a business." One would say that his father had a boat. What I had were lice. And to combat lice, the strange visitors, it was what young people now cut as a fashion. It was a punishment in my time. Now I see a few who either have lice or it is customary to do so. They shave their hair like this. I say, why do my children sometimes shave their hair? I say, why do you shave your hair? He says, because it is customary. But why didn't I live in the time when it was used? Because you had to cut your hair really short so that the lice would feel like a slide and fall off and they wouldn't have any hair to grab onto. So I remember the shame of my lice days, because they sent me to be deloused for months, but of course, it looks like I was bald. And I was very skinny, very skinny. They saw that I have hair over my ears, always covering them a little bit. That was because of a trauma that I had, because my ears, being very skinny, were really 2 radars. If I feel like it, one day I'll show the photo from that time when I was lousy. Those were 2 radars that were catching flies, they were catching mosquitoes. Bald, skinny, but no, now I'm fine. I'm super heavy, what a shame. I thought I would never recover. I thought that I would suffer with the issue of aesthetics, with the issue of not being popular. And very early in life, for a few of us, the issue of appearance ends up affecting the way we are, the way we approach life. You read any magazine, you see any advertisement, television, magazines, commercials, they bombard us with the same empty promises. How to look beautiful in 10 days. Reduce that cellulite once and for all. Get rid of cellulite with that anti-cellulite cream. Reduce wrinkles. Are they going to reduce your grandmother's hair? It doesn't reduce anything. Right? Oh, get rid of your baldness. Don't struggle with that baldness anymore. And then there's a bald guy looking sad, and then there's a long-haired guy. I got rid of it. And these things are all about one thing, one common denominator, which is self-satisfaction. And it's a matter of feeling admired, desired, and ultimately, loved or wanted or accepted. And in a certain sense it's a matter of power, because we want to control the way others respond to us, and our dominant culture seems to be completely immersed in the worship of the idol of appearance. God says, you have to reconcile yourself with who you are, because that sometimes prevents God from using you. It was very difficult for me to understand that I was like this, to understand that God was going to use me as I was, that I was not a factory defect. When God tells me, youth pastor, they will tell you, I had a hard time believing the Lord. Quote, I said, how am I going to inspire others? How am I going to stand with confidence? How am I going to transmit a message of faith, of hope, if I can barely fight with my bones? Quote. And I believe that this is not a minor issue, it is an undercurrent within congregations, this cult of aesthetics, not feeling comfortable with what God gave us. So, I ask myself a series of brutally honest questions so that you do not have to say amen, no, or yes, but that you answer them in your heart. One of them is, do you have a hard time serving the Lord if you don't look your best? If you don't feel good, you get upset or envious or easily judge those who have a certain type of beauty that you feel you'll never achieve, people who are more muscular, blonder, darker, or those who are devilishly thin. You tend to worry more about how you look on the outside than about the person you're becoming on the inside. You spend more time trying to make yourself look more attractive than you do allowing the Word of God to mold your soul. You regularly repeat to yourself the negative comments that other people have said to you about your appearance, to the point that sometimes it affects your mood. I wouldn't be surprised if 2 or 3 of these questions touch a sensitive nerve in you, because in this culture it's very difficult to escape. The altar of appearance worship. And then God can't use you fully, He can't use you to the fullest. I've seen many young people who have incredible ability, but they feel comfortable with the way their face looks or the way their voice feels. I've often heard phrases like, oh, when I watch myself recorded, I can't stand my voice. Imagine those of us who have been talking and talking and talking about the 20 years we've been on TV and YouTube and so many other places. We had to reconcile with our voices. I don't like my voice either, and I'm not the type to look at myself and say, hey, I'm going to look at myself, but I had to reconcile because I said, if God had wanted to give me another voice, He would have given it to me. If God had wanted to give me another face, He would have given it to me. He would have given me another eyebrow. But it seems that's what was in the mix and that's what I got. And so I had to reconcile with myself, because no one can love another if they don't love themselves first. No one can love God if they don't love themselves. Because if you belittle yourself, you belittle the Creator who made you this way. He's saying, I would have created another person. I would have added here, taken it out here, taken it out here, put it here, from here, I would have taken the side out. Each one of us has his or her own way of creating ourselves, but the Lord made us in a certain way, and I believe that when He allows us to be the way we are through genetics, it is because He has a purpose. It is because sometimes that is precisely what is going to empower us, what God is going to use. Now, when does one feel comfortable with oneself? Well, it is never enough. You know the Bible story of Rachel from Genesis chapter 29, which is an excellent example of this. Don't forget that Rachel had been extremely blessed in the beauty department, because the Bible tells us that she was much more beautiful than her older sister Leah, and that she had a wonderful countenance. To the point that when Jacob sees her for the first time, he falls in love at first sight. Not all women can produce that someone sees them and says and falls in love and their jaw drops. There are no others who can make a man fall in love with her little by little. This woman made the prince of the time fall in love at first sight. She was so beautiful that Jacob says that when he saw her she cried. Raquel was beautiful, gorgeous, and she had the devotion and love of her husband. No woman could want more, right? However, she wanted something more. What Raquel wanted most was basically everything we want. Do you know what we don't have? She wanted what you didn't have. She could have said, well, I stand in front of the mirror, I'm Raquel, I'm Miss Genesis. I fell in love with a man at first sight. However, she wanted what she didn't have, children. And when you feel like you're missing something, like in my case, that you have too many lice, too little hair, too many ears, too many eyebrows, too bony, too chubby, too big a belly, too loose, too flat, like your grandpa's flat tail, when that happens, you're not happy, you can't stand up straight. When I see The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the famous Disney animated film, I don't see a man with an anomaly, with a hunchback, but rather I see someone with his head down, as if he's not happy with what he's been given. And there are people who don't have an anomaly, they only see it, they only perceive it. And I'm not talking about a physical issue, it can also be a communication issue. There are those who stutter when they speak. There are those who can't form coherent sentences or have dyslexia, can't read, can't express themselves, have great intellectual capacity, but can't communicate it. There are others who had a lack of academic preparation and that affected the way you communicate with others because you always feel that you're at a disadvantage when discussing any subject with someone who has a university degree or who reads more. Whatever it is, you feel that you don't have what you should have so that God can use you to do well in life. And even though Rachel was beautiful, she desperately longed for a child to prove her worth and importance. Now, what was going to happen once she had him? We don't have to imagine because Genesis tells the whole story. God was kind to Rachel, He gives her a son and she names him Joseph. What does that mean? Jehovah, add me another son. Joseph means, Jehovah, add me another son. In other words, when she's receiving that son, the only one she wanted, if only to know what it's like to feel like a mother, she names him, I want another one, or I won't be happy either. Do you see what's happening? Even at the time that Rachel received what she thought she had, she felt like it was an empty promise and she longed for something more. In this case, another son was something that she believed she had to have. It was something, as I said in the last service, that she made into her God with a small g, something that changed her heart. That's the nature of idolatry. Now, wanting children is not what caused Rachel to be an idolater. There's nothing inherently wrong with wanting them. Just as there's nothing wrong with wanting to look good. It's nice to look good, to exercise, to take care of yourself. The great irony is that the more we focus on an idol, whether it's our appearance, having that child we don't have, the house we can't have, or whatever, the more dissatisfied we feel on the inside. Michelle Mayers is the story of a girl who first thought she was fat when she was 8 years old, and Michelle struggled with her body image throughout her developmental years. She says, "My freshman year of college I learned I had mononucleosis, which not only made me feel tired and run down all the time, it also took away my appetite, and for 6 weeks she barely ate enough to stay on her feet. When she went to the doctor's office, she knew she had lost weight, but she had no idea how much until she stepped on the scale at the clinic. She says, I remember the nurse gasping as she adjusted the scales and she said, 'Girl, when you were here 6 weeks ago you weighed 138 pounds, today you weigh 118. And that was when Michelle entered the new and scary world of anorexia nervosa. That was the solemn promise she made that day that she would do whatever it took to get to her ideal weight, which was much less than 118 pounds. And that new goal consumed her life. She worked out hard every day. She kept to a very strict diet of just 16 calories a day. And she remembers, it was my best moment, my happiest moment of my life, because everywhere I went I was getting compliments. A lot of women were envious of me and asking me how I got my body. The most amazing thing was that I got a lot of attention from guys in college who wouldn't look at me before, and now they started looking at me. So even though some people find it hard to believe, I still, even though I weighed a little over 100 pounds, felt fat. So my food portions got smaller and smaller until I skipped them all and was taking appetite suppressant and fat-burning pills. Even then, I was very concerned about how I looked in the mirror. I felt like I was still fat. One night, when I still thought I weighed close to 100 pounds, I stepped on the scale and discovered that I weighed 89. And Miguel began to realize that he had a real problem, but he didn't know what to do. But on April 14, 2005, God got Miguel's attention. After 13 days without any food, she went out to run as part of a marathon, and at mile 19 her mission became clouded. She tripped and fell to the ground. Her then 83 pounds crumpled to the pavement and she literally felt as if every fragile bone in her body was shattering, and she woke up in the hospital. She doesn't know how she got there, and that's when she admitted to her family and friends and her parents that something was wrong. Okay, and she began a long road to recovery. She is one of the 7 million women and another 1.5 million men who struggle with an eating disorder, because worshiping at the altar of appearance can have dangerous consequences. And it's a demon that affects adults and young people. And there are people who can't see well, kids who can't see well, but they make an effort because they don't want to wear glasses. Others don't want to put in what they need to put in their teeth, but they struggle with something that doesn't allow them to be happy. And when you have self-esteem issues, it affects your spiritual life. Oh, it does. Your whole life, you always want to be like someone else, to have what someone else has, to have what someone else has. And then God says, I can't use you until you heal yourself, become healthy, and love the uniqueness that I gave you. That's why our fingerprints are unlike any other. No one else on the planet has your fingerprints. That has to tell us something. No one has exactly your ability. No one has your exact hair color. No one has your skin color. No one has your exact voice tone. That's something that God gave us because there's something in the original, in the unique thing that God blesses.